you. Good morning, everyone. So as introduced, my name is Sophie, and I will be your moderator for this session today. Perhaps starting with just a quick few words about CEMIA. As introduced, we are the International Center of Expertise in Montreal on AI. Basically, what we do is that we implement high-impact projects on responsible AI, and basically we support the experts of the GPA into the development and implementation of their projects. As such, we support the Responsible AI Working Group, and it is my pleasure today to be moderating the session that will be doing an overview of all the work that was done throughout the year in the Responsible AI Working Group. So this should be a super exciting session, and I'm pleased to introduce you today, first the co-chairs of the Responsible AI Working Group that were not that could not join in person today, but who are joining remotely. So the co-chairs of the Responsible AI Working Group are Catherine Régis, professor of the Faculty of Law at the University of Montreal in Canada, as well as Professor Raja Shatila, professor emeritus on AI in robotics and ethics at Sorbonne University. And we also have today with us the co-chairs, the co-leads, of all the projects of the working group. So we have starting to the right-hand side for you of the stage, we have Michael O'Sullivan from University of Auckland. Then we have Juan David Gutierrez from the Universidad de los Andes. We as well have with us Amir Bani Fatemi from AI Commons and XPRIZE. We are also pleased to be joined by Alistair Nutt from University of Victoria, Mr. Nicolas Miaille from the Future Society, Professor Lee Teetrich from Duke University as well. And we will also have joining online Professor Dino Prijeski from University of Pisa, as well as Edithia Mohan from the National Standards Authority of Ireland, Benjamin Prudhomme from Mila, Paola Ricorte from University Technologico of Monterrey, and Francesca Rossi from IBM. So thank you very much, all of you, for the whole year, the hard work and all the effort that you put into the work. And what we now will do, I'll pass the ball to the co-chairs of the working group that will present the overview of the work that was done throughout the year, and then we'll pass the ball to the different project co-leads to do deep dives, I would say, quite quickly onto their projects, and we'll close the session by a Q&A that I'll have the pleasure of moderating. So that being said, without further ado, I would like to invite Raja and Catherine to take the floor for the introduction of the session. Thank you very much. And we have Raja joining online. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, probably because I can hear myself. So I see the room is full. In fact, I'm very sorry to not being physically with you today. I'm sorry to miss this great event with you. Thank you for joining us anyway, and in the room and online. And I'm very pleased to present to you the progress of the working group, the Responsible AI Working Group this year. I would like to first thank the summit organizers for providing us with the opportunity to engage with the international AI community and with the Indian community on our work that I've been doing actually since 3 years now. And I would like to say also that this year marks the end of my mandate, both as expert and as co-chair of this group. When I stepped into the mandate of co-chair back in 2020 at the beginning of GPA, our first objective was to select the priority themes we needed to address the challenges faced by our global society. And this is now what we have developed after 3 years. Our project, for example, Responsible AI Strategy for the Environment, RAISE, social media governance. We also, these are the 2 projects we selected in the beginning. We created a subgroup also to tackle the challenge of the fight against the pandemic. Because, of course, as you know, we started while the pandemic was going on. was our project, Pandemic Resilience. This project has explored complex issues, diverse and complex societal issues, and are still running till today, and we will have presentations about these projects. Their work has been really foundational, central component to achieving our work in 2022. We have also started working on new areas new actions in 2023, such as scaling responsible AI solutions, diversity and gender equality in AI, and our sandbox project for responsible AI governance. These projects have been launched this year, as I said, and we were able to deliver practical outcomes that we presented as part of this summit as well. Unfortunately, my colleague Catherine was not able to join us, Catherine Regis, to join us live or online. But we have a brief note from her that will be broadcast soon now. So, Catherine, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Responsible AI Public session. I wish I could have been with you in New Delhi for what promises to be a very good session with my colleagues from the working group present to showcase the amazing work we have achieved over the years. Like Aja, this summit marks the end of my mandate as the co-chair of the Responsible AI Working Group. When I started my mandate 2 years ago, I had 3 key objectives. First, to increase the connection between member states' priorities and DK's experts' work. Second, to further deploy a human rights agenda in our projects. And third, to include more gender and cultural diversity in our group and ensure that we have an inclusive approach in our discussions and projects. I'm happy that we were able to progress on all these objectives, and I hope that we will continue to do so in the future. It has been a real privilege to lead this working group of brilliant-minded people who sincerely care about the future of responsible AI. Our working group mandate closely aligns with DK's overall mission by contributing to the responsible development, use, and governance of AI systems, ensuring diversity and inclusivity to promote a resilient society which takes into account the interests of vulnerable and marginalized groups. Within our working group, we believe that to develop and use AI responsibly, we need to work towards technical, societal, institutional, and legal methods, as well as tools that provide concrete support to AI practitioners and deployers. We also need awareness and training to enable the participation of all and ensure the alignment of our systems with our society's principles, values, needs, and priorities. Human-centered approaches need to be at the heart of all decisions we make in the design and use of AI. And today, with the increasing influence advanced AI systems play within our societies, it is essential that an organization such as the Global Partnership on AI continues to deepen its work and brings both DK members, governments, and AI experts together to tackle the challenges of the future by providing a better understanding of advanced AI technologies and what safeguards must be put into place to guarantee safe and responsible use. I am confident that our group will continue its progress in the next years as we have recently identified potential collaborative and high-impact projects emerging from the first DK Innovation Workshop held in person in Montreal last September. We will also continue on various projects that will be presented today. I'm very proud of our work, and I want to say thank you to all the experts that give their time and expertise to ensure the success of this collaborative effort. So without further ado, I wish you all a great session, both in person and virtually. Thank you.
Let's move to the Joshua Benjo and then Catherine Regis came in while Joshua has finished his own mandate. And we have working in complementarity because Catherine has a legal and public policy expertise and I have an engineering expertise. And this is a good fit for actually having the ability to understand all the facets, the complex facets of the work that we have been achieving in GPEC. And I really think that this combination of knowledge give us the required capacity. So the responsible AI working group mandate is to foster and contribute to the responsible development, use, and governance of human-centered AI systems. And this in congruence with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring diversity and inclusivity to promote a resilient society, in particular in the interest of vulnerable and marginalized people. Next. Our group has 45 experts, including 2 observers, and these experts come from the members of the GPay, which are shown in these flags, and the 2 observers are one from the OECD and a second from UNESCO. So we have also this international participation. Next. During this year, in 2023, we have produced 8 reports that you can find on the GPay website. And these reports are the work of our groups, of our projects, and they will be detailed and presented by their colleagues, respectively. So, next slide. And I would like to now give back the floor. Our first project is about pandemic resilience. So, Sophie, back to you. And let me know if any thing is needed from me during this period of presenting the project. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Raja. I don't know. No.
Hello.
It's on. Thanks very much, Raja. So I would like to invite Mike to do the presentation on his project. You're more than welcome to join me on the podium.
Noarani mai ana o kutupuna ko Sullivan Tokofano ko Te Atu Tokapuri enoho ana o ki na whenua me na waitapu o te kaura maki. Tina kami, tina koto, ka makaho. My name is Michael Sullivan. My ancestry comes from Ireland and China. Sullivan is my last name. I live in Te Atu and I just want to acknowledge the mana whenua there, which is te kaura maki, and also welcome to all of you here. So I'm the co-leader of the Pandemic Resilience Project. Next slide, please. So this project started dealing with the global COVID pandemic, and one of the big issues with when complex situations like this occur is that governments are having to make decisions without necessarily knowing how those decisions are going to pan out. Alongside that, there's also the pandemic was happening in multiple different places and multiple different times, and so things that would happen, for instance, in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, versus things that happened in India were quite different, even if the decisions were the same. So because these crises were happening in similar ways in different places, there was a lot of noise being created in terms of decisions being made. In addition to that, some of the objectives of the governments throughout the world were the ideas of balancing, for example, economic effects versus the public health outcomes. And so the effect of decisions on those two objectives sometimes wasn't clear. What we did in the pandemic resilience is a solution that used data to drive those decisions, or at least inform those decisions. It enabled us to also generate scenarios, so try what if. So what happens if we put mask wearing on public transport? What happens if we close schools? What happens if we go to a full lockdown? And so on. Also, one of the things we found out during the Pandemic Resilience Project was don't put all your eggs in one basket is the best way I can describe it. That means use lots of different models, and there are lots of different models out there, and the Pandemic Resilience Project brought those models together in a way that we could actually benefit from all of those models in an ensemble way. And then one of the things I'm quite proud of is we had a very diverse group of people working on the project, both geographically diverse backgrounds, some gender diversity, probably not enough actually, so I have to talk to Catherine a little bit more about that. Also the idea was to take skills that occurred in one location and be able to easily transport them across the world so that knowledge was shared amongst communities, and I think that's one of the keys of responsible ABS practice. Next slide, please. So this slightly complicated diagram is what was happening throughout the world. So I'm just going to wander over here beside people and forget my voice. So in New Zealand, so you can think of location A in New Zealand, we had estimates of global parameters. We had estimates of global parameters. We had estimates of what was happening in New Zealand, and we had some model-specific parameters. We created a model. We calibrated it to input data. We compared it to output data. We got a nice prediction, and then we calibrated that to work as well as we could. Other people were doing the same thing in other locations, Australia, the US, the UK, and so on. However, the global parameters across those locations weren't necessarily agreed upon. So the reproduction number, for instance, of the alpha variant of COVID may have been different in my model than it was in the models used in the US. So the idea was to make sure we're using parameters consistently, but also enable models that work well in one place to work well in another place. Next slide, please. So this gave rise to our ensemble of models. So you can see here we're using the same standard global parameters across both locations. We're also using both of our models in both locations and the same parameters at the location to run those models. We're putting input data in. Each of the models will allow slightly different parameters in the locations, but then down the bottom, a little bit behind our panel's heads, that's okay, panel, don't worry, we can all see. Then we get the accuracy of the ensemble models, and again, we're calibrating back. So we're now building models that are using the same parameters consistently. We have multiple models in all of our locations, and we've calibrated those models to try and discover the best parameters across all those models that enable the best fit to the data, so the best fit to the pandemic spread across all the locations that we have of interest. Next slide, please. What this meant was, now we had multiple models in multiple locations, we could also use those models in a way where the best model for the best situation was selected. So in the plot you can see to the top right, there are two machine learning models, the conditional LSTM, I can tell you what LSTM is in the break, and the other LSTM, and then we sample from those randomly, and you can see the sample ensemble had a better fit to the data, so less mean average error than the two models by themselves, and this was because the conditional LSTM was very good for once the spread had died out, whereas the LSTM was really good when the spread was starting, and so if we could randomly choose between those two, actually we got a better fit overall. This meant using the models that we created, probably don't need to now actually. This meant now using the, oh, sorry, back to the previous slide. This meant using the models that we've created now, there's a lot of resilience, so we can use the right model at the right time. Within New Zealand, the data-driven models didn't work well because we didn't have a lot of pandemic spread, didn't have a lot of cases. In other places such as the US and the UK, those models work really well. And so now this provides governments with multiple models. They can try and use the right model at the right time. We can weight the outcome of the ensemble depending on which phase of the disease we're in. It also meant that you could get insight from multiple models at the same time. So you didn't have to choose which model you believed. You could run all of them and see what they showed you, and actually you could adapt your decisions that would work well across all those models. So it would give you resiliency in decision-making depending on these different types of knowledge. Because we standardized everything and used our models in multiple different locations, now we could really rapidly put them in place various places. So, for instance, in some of the testing we've been doing, we created a model that worked for both New Zealand and Sudan, and then pretty quickly we created a model that worked for New Zealand, Sweden, the UK and Kenya all at once. So we could really quickly put our models into new locations. And one of the interesting findings of this study was the ensemble model seemed like a good idea. The standardizing data seemed like a good idea, so why weren't people doing it? And actually I think that there's a lot of funding in various different locations really looks at creating one or two models, and the teams work separately and they compete a little bit even for funding, and they come back and they provide the results. But actually, if we could work at ways of standardizing data, enabling situations where there's a interface, application programming interface from my coding background, where people could plug into the data, we get multiple models running in multiple places all at the same time, get the insights of these ensembles. Next slide, please. So we've got some key recommendations for policymakers in the report. I'm just going to summarise by saying what we think needs to happen is modelers need to work with policymakers. We need to embed the idea of modelling within our decision-making processes, but we need to make it easy so it can go lots of different places. However, we also need to make sure that those models are producing results that are useful in the real world. So you can see down the bottom, number 7, is looking at testing the readiness of the models in real life. So one of the things you want to do is what's called a tabletop simulation to try and see how would this work if a real pandemic breaks out. One more slide, please. So this is the last one. So where do we think this is useful for government? A lot of what-if simulations. So I saw this a lot within New Zealand. Tried lots of different things. See what happens if we put these interventions in place. We can also then move to the idea of rather than predicting what's going to happen, we can start prescribing or suggesting what's going to happen. And so we can say, this is the level of your pandemic, so you should try putting these interventions in place, and that's going to get you your best health outcome or the best balance of health outcomes and economics. Finally, we can extend to other diseases, and really the key takeaway for me for this project is that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how modelling can impact decision-making throughout the world, and I think the Pandemic Resilience Project has shown how this could be something that could be in place instead of the big scramble that happened to get models ready as the pandemic was progressing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike.
Thank
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite Amir as well as Francesca to present the project called Scaling Responsible AI Solutions. And Francesca is joining online.
Is Francesca with us?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to share with you the work of Scaling Responsible AI in 2023 as part of the Responsible AI Working Group. When Francesca and I started this project, the idea was to really put an attention emphasis on operationalizing effort around AI. There's a web of effort doing everywhere. People are working on policy, working on best practices, on benchmarking, on data governance, on funding startups, or doing basically Project AI for Good. But really there is a missing link in terms of understanding the levers of how AI can be operationalized and going from ethics principles that are governing us to some form of trustworthy, safe environment where we can actually scale applications and basically serve society. So this project was trying to sit in the middle of trying to understand what are the impediments, the difficulties of building responsible solutions and on how they could scale. Because at the end of the day, if you want to benefit people, the project needs to scale. They cannot be remaining in a lab or just a part of an article or a demonstration point. Next slide, please. So the project is really talking about providing advice and support and learn also, because we're learning a lot from teams across the world that are building right now AI solutions that deem to be responsible and help them evaluate how they can actually be set and be ready to scale those applications in a responsible manner, but also in a way to serve a much larger part of the population or different contexts or different areas. And of course, provide guidelines to AI teams, naturally, but also to policymakers on how to address issues and challenges that the team faces and how they can basically support scaling responsible AI solutions. Next slide. So if we want to summarize our work, it can be summarized in this diagram, which is there are many applications that would scale. For instance, a chatbot for customer support on a website can easily scale. You've seen many examples. Many of them are implemented today. We don't know to what extent they could be deemed responsible or safe for different groups of people. Or image generator, AI image generator may scale, but it may not be responsible. Adversely, there are solutions that are having been worked by academia and researchers that are meeting the goals of responsibility, but we don't know if they're going to scale. We don't know if they have access to a large pool of data to scale. We don't know if they're going to be meeting different regulatory pressures or governance structure. We don't know if they're going to be able to scale across different genders and contexts. So scaling becomes an issue. So there are basically 4 quadrants where some solutions could be neither scalable or responsible. Some of them are scalable but not necessarily responsible. Some of them are responsible but not scalable. The goal is to basically evaluate how solutions that are beneficial to society and could serve a large group of population and can actually meet both goals. Next slide. I'm going to pass on to Francesca, my co-chair, to talk about it a little bit. We did a call for proposal and participation. We had 23 applications from this geographical representation, and we selected 5 teams from 5 continents to really work on these solutions. We could have selected more, but really the first year for us, the goal was to learn, understand the challenges they're facing, how they are understanding policy, how they understand regulations, how they understand data governance, and how they are tying it all together in terms of providing a readiness that we can evaluate thanks to our mentors and experts about their being able to scale. Next slide. I'll pass it to Francesca, my co-chair, to talk about a few slides. Are you ready, Francesca?
Yes, thank you, Amir. So, as Amir said, we had an open call where any team developing an AI solution could apply to participate in this project. And this was done during the first months of the year with significant outreach, because we really wanted everybody to know about this. And as Amir said, 23 teams responded from all over the world. And then we selected 5 that I will tell you more details about in a minute. And with these 5, we went through a journey from April to basically now that included many phases. So the first one was to really understand what their project was and what their challenges in terms of responsibility and scalability were. Then we matched them with some mentors, which were GPA experts participating in the Responsible AI work group, but also experts from other working groups that were available to mentor and to help and advise these 5 teams in what their challenges were about and what they could do about that challenge. And I want to emphasize that not only we advised the team, but we also learned a lot from these teams and their challenges in really understanding what are the main issues in this path towards scalable and responsible AI solutions. So we went through a period of mentorship and then a period of evaluating what these teams were doing, how they had worked on their challenges, or they were planning to work on their challenges, and how they were planning to operationalize what we work together about addressing the challenges. And then for all this path, we wrote in the GPA report that you can find in the GPA website, we wrote our summary of what we learned and what we did together with these 5 teams, and also some useful recommendations gathered as an insight from the experience of this project for both AI teams and governments to facilitate the addressing of these challenges. To go to the next slide, here is just some key activities, as I say, the mentorship, the working on the challenge, the recommendation that we put together, the publication of the report, and then the evaluation of the teams on their implementation plan for what they have discussed with the mentors. And then the idea is to start again next year, but of course building and being much more accelerated, especially in the initial phases, because of the experience that we have been having this year. To go to the next slide, yeah, this is a description of these 5 teams that we have. So you see that they are very geographically distributed. One is from India, and you will meet this team also during the DeFi Summit in person. One is from Italy, also will be represented there. Then it's Mexico, Canada, and Germany. So they represent very different countries, but also very different ways of addressing the AI challenges and building AI solutions. So the team from India is about healthcare access, and it has challenges related to data collection and applications. The Italian team is about workers' well-being related to healthcare of workers, and There we focus on the challenges for the use of wearables in healthcare and in industry in a very responsible way. The team from Mexico is about environment and they were building a model, an AI model, to recognize deforestation areas in Mexico and then support the government with decision support system that could help them make useful decisions from the output of the model. The team from Canada is about auditing AI systems and in particular chatbots. And these the challenges that we focus here are how to build guidelines for responsible AI guidelines for the analytics of these conversational systems. And finally, the team for Germany is building a platform for democratic participation and is based on voice bots, this platform. And so here we focus on guidelines for the responsible use of this platform technology for the participation of citizens and feedback, people-centered feedback. You go to the next slide. Some of the key findings. So although these 5 teams and projects were very different from each other and being done in a very different AI environments, that we saw that they really faced some of the very similar challenges in integrating in the project what we would call responsible AI principles and scalable, so that they could scale responsibly. So here is a list of some of the challenges that we identified together with these teams. So to the human-centeredness concept, how you implement it in your project, how you embed it in a project. The data governance framework, the robust and transparent data governance framework, the consultation with stakeholders so that they can build trust between these users and the project. User education was a topic that was talked about with many of the teams. And also how to adhere to the responsible AI principles and through also the safe and effective testing of the projects. Also issues about safety while scaling a solution. And finally, there are some challenges that are about availability of resources before deployment. If you go to the next slide. So here is a very short summary. In the report you find a lot more details about the key recommendations that the project team, together with the mentors and the team and the 5 teams and so on, put together for 2 kinds of stakeholders. Both AI teams themselves, so these 5 but also many other AI teams, and also for policymakers, because some of these challenges can be, the addressing of these challenges can be facilitated by the governments. And also we wanted to address policymakers because after all GPA is a set of governments, so policymakers, that can play a very important role in facilitating ways for addressing the challenges that AI teams face in making their project responsible. So you see, for example, for policymakers is focus on standards, on regulation, thinking also about competitiveness, about supporting infrastructures, about asking for controlled testing, of course, funding structure specifically for responsible AI, to not put speed over safety, but the opposite, to be innovative about evaluating the AI solution, to facilitate data collection in a responsible way, public-private consultation, and so on. And for the AI teams, you see here also some of the things that are related to the challenges that I mentioned earlier, like stakeholder identification and consultation, responsibility as something that goes not just at the end of the project, but throughout the entire AI life cycle, impact assessment, being very clear about the indicators for responsible AI, again, testing in a controlled way, ethical oversight during testing, and decision-making, support for decision-making, in human decision-making, data governance, and monitoring and evaluation. So you'll find a lot more information about each one of these recommendations in the GPA report that we put together. If you go to the next slide, I'll pass it again to Amir to tell you more generally about what we learned and the next steps.
Thank you, Francesca. So as you've heard Francesca, going into the recommendations and specifically for AI teams and policymakers, there is so much more to learn. We will learn this based on not only the 5 projects, but also based on the experience that each mentor and each expert is bringing to the table, dealing and working with these teams. But also as we look at what is being done on the policy side, on the regulation side, on different academia. So the goal for us is to expand this work and to expand it in a way that we can capture more best practices from different regions, different countries, different sectors, different domains. So the learning can be shared accordingly. The hope is that the blueprint is a big term. I'm not sure this is the right term to use, but we're basically using the term blueprint in a sense that we want from GPA to provide a form of a guideline in terms of how to operationalize responsible AI for different purposes. And this guide will include not only the recommendations, but the learning, but also data sets and different elements that could be useful across all stakeholders. We also want to increase the reach. Well, in 2023, we reach out to 15 countries through our natural connections. We hope that we can, thanks to more partners, reach out to many, many more regions and different teams to really be more inclusive and incorporate more learnings as well. But also to start thinking about capacity building, because many of these projects have to be taken care of and developed locally. Well, the learning could be general, and AI could be very generic in nature. Most of the implementations of responsible AI has to be in the context of its usage. And the context of usage has also to be intertwined with policy and regulation and country and government support and community support. And they mean different things in different regions. So to go along those lines, we need to really be a little bit more open and try to reach out to more and collaborate more. We'd also like to collaborate with more governments because the incentives about promoting AI and safe AI should be aligned with responsible AI practices. So there is much to learn, but also much from us to also share in terms of our experience to different stakeholders, notably government stakeholders. We believe that the project could have some benefits, and one of them is a real actionable plans and basically some form of a life cycle of responsible AI. Everybody's working on those AI life cycles, but we think we can contribute on the responsible side. We mentioned the blueprint. The blueprint is going to be an important part coming from GPA, but all the members and approved by all the members could have some value. And this is very complementary to all the work that standard bodies and governments are doing. But also, more importantly, many of these teams are struggling for funding, and funding in terms of resources, but also funding for scaling. So if there's a case to be made that certain teams and certain projects could actually be scalable, responsibly scalable, the case for funding becomes more obvious for them. So this is what we're trying to deliver that. Next slide, please. We're also looking for collaboration opportunities. We're talking right now, thanks to CIMIA, to a partner that will help us actually increase our reach to Africa, but also want to do it in more countries. The importance for us is that regional collaboration is critical, and what we've done demonstrated that there is really an exchange of knowledge and expertise between mentors and people that have been doing work on the academic side or industry side with NGOs and those who are working in the field. We want to provide more support to some of these things. This support could be either cloud-based or database, but also knowledge support, which is the most important part. We're looking for more mentors and organizations to support teams, because if we have teams in different regions, naturally mentors that are going to be in those regions are going to be more involved and more in tune with their needs, the issues, and the impact they could be making. Funding deployment, as mentioned, is important, so we're trying to think about how we can actually rally more funding sources to observe and evaluate how these teams and how these projects are moving forward. By being more inclusive, probably we can collectively increase the impact that we're making, be more diverse, and as Raja said at the beginning, we really want to work on AI for good for everyone, and extending geographically is very important across multiple activities. So we're going to be sharing more. There's a session after this session in room 16 where we're going to dive into those 5 projects, where more details by each team and more question and answers, and hopefully more a panel on discussing how we can go forward. But thank you very much again for your attention.
Thanks very much, Amir.
Thank you.
Actually, we'll take the questions at the end, just because we have a few other projects. But thanks very much, Amir, and Francesca as well. We're very much looking forward to the expansion of the project next year. Now I'd like to invite Benjamin Prudhomme to present the latest development of the Diversity and Gender Equality project. And Benjamin is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Sophie, and hi, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge that although I'll be presenting alone, unfortunately, today, I'm co-leading this project with Paola Ricarte-Cuggiano, who's Associate Professor at Tecnológico de Monterrey. And so the project is entitled Towards Real Gender, Diversity and Gender Equality in AI. And for your information, what we filed this year is an advancement report. So we're almost midway through the work of the project. And so we thought that today the most helpful approach to take in presenting the project was to talk a little bit more around the process, what has been achieved thus far, but also looking forward what we'll be hoping to achieve next year with most of the deliverables happening there. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so the overall objective of the report, when it was initially, of the project, sorry, when it was initially launched with GPay, is to provide the AI ecosystem with frameworks, tools, and resources to incorporate DGE. So I'll use that term quite a bit today. Diversity and gender equality strategies throughout the AI lifecycle. And really the idea there was to kind of start from the premise, which has very much been confirmed in the literature review, that despite all of the advances and sincere work that's been ongoing towards diversity and inclusion in AI ecosystems, there's still significant gaps, both within ecosystems and also, of course, between ecosystems and countries. So this was hopefully a way of integrating applied research into this question to start mapping out a little bit more what we could do. And I emphasize on effective DGE strategies. So the idea here is to really try and have measurements and metrics around what works, what doesn't, and so that stakeholders feel well equipped. So the first specific objective is to develop what we call a toolkits, or a public-facing resource to support stakeholders. So those stakeholders, that resource, the toolkit, will be divided between different stakeholders: academia, industry, policymakers and governments, etc., to identify the most useful and context-appropriate tools to enhance diversities within their own operations and within their own subfield in the AI ecosystem. The second objective, and I will talk a little bit more on this so that everybody has clarity and peace of mind, is to provide recommendations to GPay to enhance diversity throughout its operations. And here the idea is that the report will be confidential and it will be only remitted to GPay leadership. But as we are amassing that information and those voices around most effective practices for DGE, we had conversations with GPay, which of course very much wants to continue upholding the best standards around DGE. And we thought that a good way of doing that is making sure that we mobilize that expertise that we're gaining now to advise GPay in terms of different options or effective actions that could be taken to integrate better DGE considerations within the organization. So again, that report will be confidential, but those of you who are part of the GPay leadership will be able to have it, and hopefully it's going to support the continued work of GPay around inclusion. And a few words on the approach we're taking. The first one is that we are approaching or framing the intersection of AI and diversity, gender equality as a matter of human rights. So we're looking at it throughout different resolutions, by example, from the UN Assembly, but also through the lens of different human rights like non-discrimination. All of which happens within a holistic approach, of course, because the project is global, but also with a very strong emphasis on intersectionality so that we make sure that we consider factors such as race, ethnicity, and disability, among others, and the way in which they interact. The second very important task that we gave ourselves was to document and build upon voices of marginalized groups, and we'll go through that later, but of course, it seemed quite obvious and important to us that any project around inclusion would first and foremost turn towards excluded groups and individuals to better understand their experiences as they try to navigate the ecosystem. And the last piece, and perhaps the most important one for many of you in the room, is to propose practical and actionable recommendations for effective changes towards DGE in AI ecosystems and for stakeholders specifically. So we can change the slide, please. Thank you. So as I said, in 2023, recently we filed an advancement report, which further documents what I'm going to talk about here briefly, which are the key activities that we've put together in 2023, which will feed in the deliverables that will come out in 2024. So the first one is literature review. And here it's a bit of in a way, a classic approach to scientific knowledge. So we've identified key themes, theories, methodologies, most importantly, the gaps in the literature on those topics to make sure that those gaps specifically we could integrate in the other ways in which we're collecting knowledge, like environmental scans and regional consultations. The second piece is the regional consultations. So we've engaged with localized expertise from 5 regions in the world, taking a multi-approach, so the multi-stakeholder approach. So the idea was to make sure that folks from industry, from marginalized groups, from government, etc., would come to these meetings and exchange about us, confidentially if they wish, of course, about the experiences, but also the best strategies that they found. So we've engaged in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Middle East and North Africa, North America and Europe, and Asia and the Pacific. And obviously we've met hundreds of people in those contexts. And again, that's the piece where it's a very central piece to the project in the sense that it is very important throughout the project for us to make sure that we honor and build upon the voices that have been expressed there. Then we've incorporated community perspective. And so what we've done is once we've had a first draft of the report, we've identified community organizations to provide further feedback on the report so that they could share some practices or some comments on the practices we had identified. The fourth piece was that a part of the team was working on identifying the promising practices and resources, so to provide a curated and analyzed selection of them. And one of the issues that we've been hearing often for people who wanted to get involved in diversity and gender equality work was that there was a lot that was put out there, and it was very difficult for organizations to find focused material, but also material that had used metrics or that had a sense of measuring what worked and what was efficient. And so the idea there, as we're building this public-facing toolkit, is to make sure that we, as much as possible, create that one place where those stakeholders can go and feel comfortable and confident that the resources that they're using are both quite on point for their needs, but also have been tested or evaluated for performance. And the last piece is what we called an environmental scan, which was to map existing initiatives that aim to include DGE in AI with the labeling and annotation so that people can not only refer to the toolkit of resources, but also to different projects and narratives that have worked globally. Next slide, please. Thank you. And lastly, for the outlook for 2024, so 2024 will most certainly be a bigger year for us in the sense that all of our deliverables will be coming out. The first one is to compile and analyze the results of the 2023 activities. And there's a possibility there that we move forward with additional consultations as needed, particularly to fill some of the gaps that have emerged from the first consultations. The second is to develop and deploy the diversity and gender equality toolkit. which is again a curated and annotated repository of the most efficient tools that we've identified, and it would include explanations as to the advantages and the limitations of each of the tools that would be offered on it. And the third piece, there's actually another piece missing, sorry. So the third piece will be the delivery of the report itself, the GPA report, which will include the recommendations for governments in terms of diversity and gender equality, specific to the context of the AI ecosystems and the AI lifecycle. And the last piece will be the confidential report, so the review and analysis of the current GPA practices. And again, here the idea is really to be constructive as we want to collectively move forward towards greater inclusion at GPA. And so thank you, of course. The last piece is of course to thank, as you can imagine, all of that work, and particularly the global consultations have involved an army of collaborators, contributors. And so I want to really sincerely thank the team that has worked there for their hard work. Direct you to the GPA website if you have any kind of deeper questions or you're curious about the work that's upcoming. Some of that is in the advancement report. And the last piece is for those of you who might be interested in contributing either in expertise or throughout the consultations, or if you're just curious to learn more about the project. The project is under the management of GPA's Montreal Support Center, CIMIA. So I invite you to communicate directly with them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben, for joining remotely. So, as mentioned, any questions, feel free to reach out to us. The team will be there to support. I'd like now to invite our next speakers, with an S, Juan and Aditya, to present the outcomes from the Sandbox for Responsible AI Public Procurement Project. And a bit of timekeeping. I will ask actually all the next speakers to be efficient in terms of timekeeping and like aiming at an 8-minute pitch.
Thanks, Sophie. So I'll start the timekeeping project. So this was a regulatory sandbox project. We started exploring the world of regulatory sandboxes. But what we found out was that the world of regulation itself is very nascent. Most jurisdictions are still thinking about regulation. EU is one of the first. Last night or the night before, they have kind of agreed on AI Act. So we gave it the direction of a sandbox project for public procurement, because procurement is one of the first questions on the mind of governments who are trying to procure AI products and services. Now, coming from government, I know how difficult, first of all, how laborious the procurement is in governments. We scanned some of the procurement practices, and that was the stage 1. Then we prepared a report, which will be available to all the GPA delegates. And the stage 2 and stage 3 will follow depending on what we plan and what kind of support we get. As far as procurement is concerned, the current procurement practices were as simple as we want to process 4 times the citizen applications per month than we are currently processing. So that is how a government tender typically lists an AI requirement for scaling. So we felt that there was a need for making procurement practices more detailed, more responsible, defining guidelines on what is responsible AI, how to judge it, how to test it, and how to deploy it. So I'll highlight, next slide, please. So the slides on the laptop are not changing.
No, but you can ask, just ask him next slide. My colleague Janik is changing.
Okay. Okay, so 2023, we reviewed a whole spectrum of practices from all over the world, so India, South America, Europe, to find out what are the existing government practices in procurement. And we found that most of the practices are restricted to the aspect of procuring, but not the aspect of maintenance and deployment. So the report highlights the good practices of the world, but it also highlights the current gaps. And we look forward to having greater collaboration with governments in other parts of the world to actually implement some of these practices and see how AI procurement can happen in government departments, and how these practices play out in on the ground. And then we will publish these practices for wider availability. Juan, would you like to elaborate further?
Yes, thank you. Can we go back to the first slide? And yeah, that one. So just to wrap up what Aditya was mentioning, during the year we met with multiple stakeholders, including governments, academia, international organizations, non-profits, professional organizations, and companies who are interested in some sort of sandbox or at least testing bed for AI projects, and more specifically for public procurement. And so the report that will be published shortly includes resources along all the AI cycle of procurement. When I mean all the AI cycle is from the appraisal of a project that a government is foreseeing. We've understood after reviewing the literature and conducting these interviews with all these actors that so many governments are interested in acquiring AI, but they don't know where to start. And most of them should probably start with having people who are able to carry out the procurement processes. So that's why we started very early in the AI cycle. And the report covers the different stages until deployment. And we hope that this report will be a guide for practitioners and for government officials. It's still not a report about how to conduct the whole procurement process. That's something that may come up later on. This is just a review of all the tools that are available out there. Next slide, please. We do have some ideas of how this sandbox should look like. Should be experimental, agile, anticipatory, and collaborative with multiple stakeholders. And we say this because procurement processes require many eyes, require lots of hands, of course, and this may entail that the process is not fast, is not let's say, sufficiently agile for the acquisition of technology. And this is why we have this basic template of principles that should, or probably should, guide the procurement process. Next slide. Oh, okay. No. So with that, I'll finish just by saying that we've learned a lot with the process. We started with an initial idea that Aditya mentioned, but during the process things changed. It was experimental in some way, and we hope to show you the report soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan and Aditya. And now I'd like to invite if you move on to the next slide, I'd like to invite the 3 co-leads of the RAISE project, so the Responsible AI Strategy for the Environment, to present their project and objective. 7-8 minutes, guys. Good job. Thank you.
Yes. Hello again. While my colleagues are taking seats, actually standing up, as I see. Hello. So I'm co-leading this project with Nicola Miai and Lee Tidrich, who are on site. Responsible AI Strategy for the Environment. Next slide, please. So the objectives of so I remind you that this project has started in 2021. We started with one of the 2 projects, this one and the responsible and the social media project, which will come later. The objectives here are to develop and implement a responsible AI strategy for climate action and biodiversity preservation. So climate action and biodiversity preservation. We have produced foundational reports that you can find on our website, lay the ground for practical actions, and conducted applied projects also, standalone and use case. That's important. And we work also with international institutional partners to anchor AI for environmental action. OECD, for example, was a very close partner with whom we worked on AI compute impacts, presented at COP27 and 26. So let's move to Nico and Lee for the detailed presentation of the project. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, carry on. Maybe just to begin, let me use the opportunity to thank Raja and Catherine for their leadership of the working group over the past years on that project and for their support. I want also to thank the Government of India, Bharat Sarkar, for hosting us so beautifully in that venue. Congratulations, and thank you for your hospitality, and congratulate the incoming working group co-chairs, Francesca and Amir, and all my colleagues on the dais here for the wonderful work. When we started years ago, this intersection between climate, biodiversity preservation, and AI was not well understood, not well captured in terms of what can be done operationally. So a lot of what we've been doing is seeding the ground and community building, which people usually don't see a lot of value into. Why we're all congregating in that beautiful hall is to do that, to form a community. And exploring in a very practical way, but with that community building effort, the intersection between responsible AI and climate is something we've been doing for the past years. Combining, articulating, squaring up, as we say, the ecological and the AI revolution in the way that does not sacrifice but actually promotes the best from our values in terms of freedom, equality, respect for human beings, is the endeavor of a generation. We cannot miss this, and that's why we started with that project. As part of that, we've been working and will continue to work with so many organizations that you're seeing on that slides, people coming from the private sector, people coming from the activism and civil society sector, science, of course, economy, and obviously international organizations, the UN, of course. You cannot work on climate without the UN. Let that be clearly stated once again, and as part of that, colleagues from UNESCO, IPCC, and many others. This has happened. This will continue because this is one of the key value of that project, which is to seed the ground and form a community. Lee, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, we can go to the next slide. And just to pick up on what Nico and Raja said, and I will try in 2 minutes to summarize our work, you know, we really are at this critical moment that we can't miss. You know, we've seen the AI policy world take major leaps forward in the last couple months. In the United States, President Biden signed a really important executive order, and in that executive order, our president calls for attention on these AI and climate issues, and the political agreement that was reached in the EU in the last few days also underscores the importance of these issues. So what we've tried to do within RAISE, as Raja and Nico said, is create a roadmap to try to take these really important principles and reduce them to action. So we have our 2 baseline reports here, one focused on AI and climate, and as Nico said, we pull together the whole ecosystem. It takes a village to solve these really important problems. So we've had the pleasure of working with the OECD, with the UN, people throughout academia, throughout industry, and we've done a similar report on AI and biodiversity. And when we look at the impact, it's really twofold. It's looking at how can we use AI to help address the climate and the biodiversity crisis, but also looking at the flip side of it that, and this has gotten a lot of attention recently with generative AI, that we have to make sure as we deploy AI, we are not exacerbating the crisis. There's been lots of press reports on how generative AI is consuming huge amounts of electricity and water, and the report that we had the honor of working on with the OECD last year and presented at COP27 really focuses on, you know, how do we prevent these adverse impacts. So some of the key themes that cut across both reports is, you know, we need access to more data, and that's where we work across different working groups, the responsible AI group, working with the data governance group, the innovation and commercialization working group on how can we solve what we call the AI data challenge. We also need to create measurement techniques, which really came out in the report that we did with the OECD. We need to scale and build infrastructure. We have to make sure that we don't leave the global south behind as we do this, and some of the work work has highlighted the impacts that this has had on the global south. So, a lot of work to be done, inspiring projects, and I'll turn it back to Nico to talk about our recent workshop and what we hope to do next.
Thank you, Lee. Maybe to elaborate on that in terms of the approach. We have tried to honor the communities that are behind these questions, the communities that are focusing on climate action, and the communities that are focusing on biodiversity preservation, first of all, separately. That's why we started with this climate and action report, table-setting report. I really encourage you and all governments representative in the room to go and check it out, read the recommendations, and we are willing to continue to work with you, as we have this year, to implement these recommendations. And then we did a similar exercise last year to initiate a conversation on the biodiversity side, because we realized that these two communities have obviously a lot in common, but not everything in common. And so honoring the challenges in a separate way to then try and reconcile that was going to be not a guarantee, but a better pathway to ensure that one is not crushed under the other. Communities in biodiversity preservation will often feel that climate goes first, and so it's important that as we look at these questions of preservation and conservation and the trade-offs that exist precisely at the intersection of these and AI, addressing them separately to then reconcile them. One other thing that we have and we will continue to do, and you can maybe move to the next slide, please, is to anchor this work and inform the work of science. And so we, this year at the workshop, to particularly try and take stock of what the revolution of large language models and general purpose AI systems mean for our work. I mean, there is a revolution going out there, the Gen AI revolution going out there. What does that mean in terms of opportunities and in terms of challenges for the intersection with the environment, and responsibly adopting these totally uninterpretable technologies, but powerful technologies, pervasive technologies, proliferative, some would say, technologies, in a way that serve what is the core of Sustainable Development Goals and what is the priority as we rediscover and rediscuss every year at the COPs. And one thing that became even more clear is that, well, AI indeed has tremendous, LLMs, so to speak, have tremendous potential to help better deliver on climate action and biodiversity preservation. Okay. But they can also, and they should also be used in an assessment manner. And so, can the work of the IPCC and IPBES on the biodiversity side be enriched by a solid, responsible AI adoption roadmap to enrich the scientific work that all these scientists do to model climate, to model biodiversity depletion, and find solutions? The response is yes, of course. And aren't there the best possible communities of practice to do that responsibly? Yes, it is. The scientific method is the pursuit of knowledge at this level of robustness demands certain ethical frameworks, demands certain practical framework. So yes, at this point of intersection, we can work and indeed build something which is responsible, and we are going to do just that. Another thing that emerged, and so we are going to try and continue to work and organize this trilateral workshop between GPAE, IPBES, and IPCC to chart together what a scientific roadmap for responsible AI adoption for climate action and biodiversity preservation could look like in the years to come. And another thing we're going to hopefully continue is continuing to work with our colleagues from the OECD, and particularly the AI and compute and climate task forces, try and work together, particularly now that the EUAX seems to be providing a new legal base to advance environmental actions and assessment. How can we move towards authoritative, independent, granular benchmarking protocols for the energy consumption and water consumption of these large language models? We need that. Our societies are demanding that we provide these tools, and I think we can play a role there. And maybe moving forward and closing with a bit of a vision in terms of what RAISE stands for. It stands, as I said, as a community building ground. The vision, the kind of flagship projects that we hope to be able to move towards with all of you in the coming years look like something like this. Do we need to be able to model planetary systems at a high level of granularity in the years to come to deliver on the ecological transition? Yes, and there are projects like that. Projects in the European Union, project probably here, new models. Do we need to do that in a way that we render these models, these large multimodal models, more interpretable? Right now, they are big black boxes. So for us as a community to try and break into these black boxes requires a vessel, requires a function that makes this an imperative and serves as to mobilize investment. So imagine a few years from now that we could all work and deliver on what could look like a CERN. For those of you who know the CERN, what is the CERN in Geneva? With the Large Hadron Collider, a CERN for AI in global climate action that would enable us to predict the climate not in the next 15 days, as we can do with weather forecasting, but actually climate model and environment modeling for the next 15 years at higher granularity. We cannot do that without a serious level of interpretability that could put interpretability and responsibility and robustness of these models, which are not robust when at the center, and serve as a coalition-building element to move collectively towards that goal. This is the kind of ambition that we require, that's the kind of institutional innovation that the world requires, without which I don't think we'll be able to durably combine AI and the environment in a way that really solves key challenges in a science-centric, science-driven, but if you allow me the expression, non-science hysteric way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you both, and to Raja as well online. And now, the last but not the least, I'd like to invite Ali to present, then again, same challenge, not more than 8 minutes, the Responsible AI project for social media governance. Thanks, Ali.
Tēnā kātou katoa. Nō te heranga waka hau, ko Ali taku ingoa. So I'll be talking about the work of the Social Media Governance Group. Next slide. And again. Oh, okay, there's something different on the screen. So yeah, social media platforms, by goodness, everyone uses them. Look at those numbers, 4.85 billion. I know that India is a big place, but 4.89 billion people use social media these days in the whole world. The average user, is this you guys? Do you use social media for 2.5 hours a day? I think yes, because look at you. You're all on your phones, and us as well on the panel, by God. It's happening, this is true, okay? So social media is a giant vector for AI use, and it's one of the main ways that we see AI in our daily lives. And there are 3 bits of AI I'm going to talk about, and they're all extremely interesting and need to be looked after and governed and overseen properly. And we'll talk about how we're doing that. So we're working on recommender algorithms and harmful content classifiers, and then the new generative AI tools, which are basically being used to disseminate AI content around the world. So different questions arise in oversight here for these different technologies, and that's an important idea, that you don't ask the same question for every different AI system. They're all different, and you need to think about them differently. For recommender systems, our main question is, what effects do they have on users? And in particular, do they have harmful effects that need to be known about so that they can be alleviated? For harmful content classifiers, the main question that we'd like to think about, and we're doing this in collaboration with colleagues in the room here in India, in a project in India, how should harmful content be defined, and crucially, methodologically, who decides what counts as harmful content? Is it the people behind the closed doors of the companies, or is it something else, or should it be something else? And finally, for generative AI, we're interested in this idea that AI-generated content is going to proliferate on social media, and what we need to do is to work out how to keep track of it. How do we know what is produced by machines and what's written by people? So I'll speak very briefly about all of those things. Next slide, please. But please come and talk to me afterwards. The first thing we did is work on recommender systems. So here, these are the systems, they're AI systems that basically monitor what you're doing as a social media user, watch what you're clicking on, basically, and then give you more of the same, right? Okay? So there's a problem with that kind of learning, which any AI person would know about. What happens is the recommender system learns from what you're clicking on, and then gives you stuff, and then you click on what it gives you. So there's a positive feedback loop, right? And that means that the learning of this system is unstable and might lead you in unexpected directions. And that problem by itself is quite serious, but there's worse, given certain very well-documented cognitive biases that people have towards slightly strange content. They like to click on slightly unusual things. For instance, it's known in political discussions that people like to click on outrage, basically. Good Lord, this is a disgrace. Oh, I want to see more, I want to learn more. And if you go off in that direction and the system is learning what you click on, it's going to, oh, this person likes outrageous stuff and being horrified, and it's going to give you more of that, okay? But that's a danger, right? You can understand why that's a problem. Then there's this other one, very connected actually. So we also like to click on them, the others, the people from the other side. Oh, what are they doing now? Oh, goodness me. That's just a known, documented bias. But again, it might lead you off in strange directions. Finally, we like to click on false things more than true things. False things travel faster than true things. It's rather extraordinary, but it's true on the internet, and you know this. So the thing might learn that you like, oh, he likes that strange conspiracy theory, or they like this, this conspiracy. All of those things, we don't yet know how those affect public opinion. Clearly, they're having huge effects on public opinion. So AI systems, via these rather uncontrolled positive feedback loop learning processes, are having effects on the public opinion that we need to study better. And basically, we're working with the EU under the Digital Services Act, which is a piece of legislation which was only recently enacted, but it's now in force, which is going to give external stakeholders the ability to study these processes in more detail. Next slide, please. So here's another one, harmful content classifiers. Those are important and they're useful to help moderate content, and we need content moderation on social media platforms to keep platforms safe. But content moderation is also a trade-off with free speech, and so there's this very crucial question that needs to be resolved, this trade-off that needs to be finessed. Huge questions. And the point is that at the moment, we don't know very much about how content moderation happens. How do companies decide that this is content that's going to be removed? There's some information, but we need to know a lot more than we currently know. Basically, at the moment, they use content classifiers, which are, again, an AI system, but the way that they're trained happens behind closed doors. So our proposal is that the training sets for harmful content classifiers could be, instead of being assembled within companies, each individually to different companies, there could be a way of democratizing that process, and so it happens in a semi-public domain and consulting the, basically the public of users, So we're first of all thinking about training sets for harmful content classifiers in the domain of hate speech, and the idea there is just to directly consult citizens about what they think counts as hate speech and how it should be moderated. So for each item in this training set that we're imagining constructing, the idea is to gather the opinions of many citizens, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000. Actually, this is an interesting new form of democracy, potentially. Democracy is a great place, a great thing. We're in the land of democracy here, the largest democracy. We're actually running a pilot of this particular proposal in India with colleagues that are in this room. We have Professor Surabhi Basu from Jadavpur University in Kolkata and Prabhata Rohan Chakraborty, who's from UCL and Oxford. And our chosen domain is political hate speech. And so we're interested in data sets that are that have been gathered, and this is work which my colleagues have done in the lead up to recent elections. And the research question there is, can content moderation in this domain be devolved to essentially what counts as a citizen's jury? We're just interested to know if that will work. And we're running a pilot, and if you want to know more about that, we'll be talking about it on Thursday afternoon. You're most welcome to come along. Next slide. So finally, the last thing is AI-generated content. So this is to do with the generative AI powerful systems that have only been around for the last year, but that are revolutionizing everyone. So basically, there's a new authentication problem we're going to be faced with, a completely new one. When you see a piece of text as a consumer of text, or if you see a picture as a consumer of content, you have to ask yourself now, well, did a person do this, or did a machine make it? That has never happened before. It's a completely new problem, and we need new solutions to address this problem. So there are all sorts of reasons why we need to know. So we started off thinking about social media. In social media, we need to make sure and guard against AI-fueled disinformation campaigns. It's going to be very important for us to be able to have some way that social media companies can tell, like at scale, where large AI-generated political disinformation campaigns come from, and so on. But also, like, I'm a teacher in a university. I need to know whether my student actually wrote this thing. I'd love to have some way of knowing, and it would be the same in any other professional context. So what's needed, we argue, is reliable ways of detecting AI-generated text. So we need a bit more AI to help keep the existing AI safe. So we know, you may know this, so current detection tools for AI-generated content don't really work, right? They're developed external to companies. They just don't work. our suggestion is that the way to make them reliable is to place obligations on companies. And we have this proposed rule, which you can read about. We have a report at GPA, and we've also written papers about this. Here's the rule. It's in yellow there. A company that produces an AI generation system must demonstrate, and supply for free actually, a reliable detection tool for the content that their system generates as a condition of that system's public release. And we think that interestingly pivots the way that companies have to sort of, they're now incentivized to spend effort and time, investment basically, in good, reliable detection tools. We've written 2 proposals, and again, we've had quite a lot of uptake with policymakers. Our proposal was adopted by the EU Parliament, and its amendments to the AI Act, and we think that the recent trilogue, which has just concluded, we think that it's still in there. We can't say for sure. It's also been discussed by US policymakers. So as Lee was saying, President Biden has this executive order on AI, and a couple of the co-authors of our paper presented evidence at the judiciary hearing at the Senate that kind of fed into that process. And the executive order on AI also makes a lot of deal about this idea of AI content detection. So I think that's it for me, but keen to talk afterwards.
Thanks very much, Ali. Thanks actually very much to all the project co-leads for all the work and the efforts throughout the year. Very much appreciated. We're almost at the end of our session, but I'd like to pass the ball quickly to Raja Shatila, who had a few last words to share with the audience, and then I'll pass the ball to Amir and Francesca. So Raja, you're on.
Yes, thank you very much, Sophie. To conclude my role, I would like to heartfully thank our colleagues who have presented the group work, the projects during these years. And I would like also to extend my thanks to working group members, because with the colleagues, they were group members who contributed, experts to contribute to these projects, and also additional specialists who have helped us to build all these reports. Thank you all, and thank you for enthusiasm and this fantastic endeavor. I would like to also thank our partners, institutional partners, such as the OECD, and specifically. And now, in the name of Catherine and myself, after extending all this thank, I would like to pass the baton to our new co-chairs, the new group co-chairs, Francesca Rossi and Amir Bani Fatimi. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Francesca and Amir, for keeping the work and developing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja.
Thank you very much, Raja and Catherine. I would want to warmly thank you for your all effort for the past 3 years, but also not forgetting Yoshua Bengio that initiated this as well. Without your leadership, we don't have been here, but also all the members. We're happy to continue the work and share with you what we're about to do in the coming year. Can you show the next slide, please? If it's ready. The next slide, the other one slide. So the project that we're going to be working on in 2024, 4 of them are the continuity of what you've heard today, naming what Francesca and I talked about, scaling responsible AI, but also continue to work on systemic gender inclusion in AI ecosystems, naturally social media governance, as you heard right before myself, is an important topic that needs to continue. The RAISE project and strategy for environment is critically important. We're going to continue that, but there is 2 new projects that basically, after the sunsetting of pandemic resilience and regulatory sandboxes, 2 new projects are going to be starting. One is digital ecosystem that power committees. So as you heard about the pandemic resilience, there is a lot to do in terms of decision making and basically allowing communities to have a better understanding of how digital systems drive their life and how they can participate equally in the determination of decisions that needs to be made at different levels of society. So that's a project going to be unveiled to you shortly in the coming weeks. The other one is repository of public algorithms, which one is going to be leading, is basically arming and helping governments to create public repositories of transparent, trustworthy, reliable, responsible AI system and document them, and to make sure that citizens can understand how these public algorithms are going to be driving their life. This is an important project as well. They're going to be part of that. All these 6 projects are going to be the bouquet and portfolio project we're going to be working on next year. And we try to make sense of them as a unison and make sure that all of them are supported, not only through the work that we do here at this working group, but also in conjunction with other worker groups. Can you pass on to the next slide, please? And before I pass, I think the slide before. It was not updated, so maybe you need to update that slide. So what Francesca and I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to pass on to Francesca soon, is that we try to coordinate all this work that we heard today in the Responsible AI group on 4 major axes. The first one is to work more with governments and partners to really understand what we're doing as a whole, and to form more partnership and collaboration between different entities. The second one is to make sure that all the projects that are worked here on get more funding and more support to be deployed, because they need to be references, benchmarks, and model references that we can actually deploy. And some of the solutions need funding to get farther. I think the slide has not made it, so we're going to be talking about it. So the act that the direction we're working on is basically expand our relationship with other working groups within GPAID, but also more widely with governments and different organizations, industrial partners as well, to make sure that the work actually expands and makes sense, and specifically find support and funding for all this work to be deployed more widely. Francesca, would you like to add other potential points?
Yeah. So yes, we will work on those projects that Amir, listed and described, but we really want to increase the collaboration, and this has been done a lot already in this past year between members of GPAID, so governments, policymakers, and experts in both directions. Like recommendations from experts and the projects, recommendation to policymakers, but also policymakers asking the experts what they need, what kind of help they need, what kind of projects they need, and work. As well as Amir said, to work also beyond GPAID. Of course, we have our standard institutional partners like the OECD, but there are many other initiatives that are all global and multi-stakeholder that address similar mission, but from different angles. So I think that we should work in a synergy and in a complementary way with these other initiatives, so that we can all together, GPAID and all these other initiatives, really accelerate the path towards responsible AI solutions for all the stakeholders. So I really would like to finish thanking again Raja and Catherine and everybody, all the members for the amazing work that they did, all those work of this year and the previous years as well, but these years and all the reports. And we feel, Amir and I feel the responsibility of continuing on that great work. And of course, we will do our best, but we need the help of everybody here, the members, the member states, but also the member of the working group, and hopefully, collaboration with the other working groups. So I hope that, I'm looking forward really to work with everybody together. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. So we're both delighted to the next steps and the new journey for hopefully continuing the good work of Raja and Catherine.
Thank you very much to you both. Thanks to Catherine and Raja for their leadership in the past few years. We're at the end of our session. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions, so I would like to invite you actually to just, when you get the occasion, if you have questions, just to speak with the different project colleagues during the lunch. They will be available today. So thank you very much to all for your attendance here in the room and online as well, and have a great summit, everyone.
We would also like to express our gratitude by presenting you a small token of appreciation from our end to all the speakers here. And thank you to all the speakers who have joined us online. Thank you everyone for joining us for this session today. Hope you all have a great day. We can offer the token of appreciation.
So what do we need to do to be officially on the